As probably most people know here, Senator Leno is very familiar to Noe Valley. He was our supervisor and did an amazing job of representing us on the Board of Supervisors, has also been our state senator for the last 8 years and was our assembly member for 6 years before that. Thank you. And also personally, Senator Leno was a huge supporter of the town square, and his office really partnered with Supervisor Wiener and the residents of Noe Valley to make this space a reality. So thank you for that. Senator Leno, we're going to ask you to speak for 10 minutes, and then we're going to take Q&A for 10 minutes. Good to see you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us through this beautiful but getting chilly night. So I see a few folks have brought some blankets. That's a good thing. Thank you, Todd David. Thank you, Noe Valley Democratic Club, for bringing a citywide group to our town square. That's what this town square is all about, and we're putting it to good use. The democratic process. So, many of you know me as a 37-year resident of Noe Valley at the corner of Clipper and Douglas, and a small business owner here in San Francisco. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. This city has given me a life I never could have imagined. For so many of us, we have come here with dreams and aspirations, and it has been a dream come true. I started my business here. I fell in love here. I met the love of my life here. I lost the love of my life here to HIV/AIDS, as so many of us have been impacted by an epidemic that unfortunately is still ongoing. I had an extraordinary experience in Sacramento, being able to represent what I think is the best district in the entire state. The constituents of this district, best educated, most politically sophisticated, and more informed than any other place in the state. So you inspire those of us who have the privilege of representing you there, and got to work on great things, introducing twice a single-payer universal health care bill so that we could reform our health care system. Yeah. Move the ball forward. We've got to get that done, and don't let anyone ever tell you that we don't have enough money in the system to get to single-payer universal health care reform. Was able to amend our Fair Employment and Housing Act, otherwise known as FEHA, to include gender identity. So those who are non-gender conforming will no longer be able to be discriminated against in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And also was able to amend the dreaded Ellis Act to exempt SROs, protecting over 10,000 San Franciscans most vulnerably housed from wholesale eviction through the Ellis Act. And then, of course, introducing the nation's very first equal marriage rights bill in 2004, getting it to the governor's desk in 2005, and again in 2007, only to face 2 vetoes. Thank you so much, Arnold Schwarzenegger. No visionary he. We gave him history on a silver platter, and he didn't have a clue. And then, of course, able to author California's $15 an hour minimum wage bill with an escalator in it, so it will never fall below the federal poverty line again. And that's so important, of course, because the cost of living here is 30% higher than it is across the nation. And when an employer pays a sub-poverty wage, like Walmart, owned by the wealthiest family in the country, the Waltons, by definition, that low-wage earner qualifies for public assistance for housing, for health care, and for their food. That means all of us taxpayers are subsidizing the wealthiest family in the country. That is wrong. So it is no longer legal in California, once we get to $15 an hour in 2022, to pay a sub-poverty wage. And then lastly, just share with you, and we'll get on to the local issues, years that I spent working on criminal justice reform. Introduced the legislation that led to Prop 47, which passed with 60% of California voters' support, which changed from felony to misdemeanor, 6 low-level property crimes, and possession of drugs. And why this is so important It also allowed about 800,000 Californians to be able to clear their records from a felony to a misdemeanor, thereby allowing them to access the three things that we know keep our community safer by preventing recidivism, providing former offenders with access to housing, to education, and employment. The three things that felonies put further out of reach for former offenders. So, I am running for mayor of San Francisco because I believe it is time for a new direction at City Hall. On June 5th, voters of San Francisco will have a real choice before them for fundamental change or the status quo. And if I have your support and get to City Hall as mayor, I intend to shake things up. Because our crises of affordability, housing and affordability and accessibility, and homelessness are out of control. And so I want to protect the quality and character of our neighborhoods, our small businesses, and our merchant districts, and to keep San Francisco a place where working people can afford to live. And that's what I intend to do as mayor of San Francisco. With regard to affordability, this is not a problem unique to San Francisco. It is a regional problem, it is a statewide problem. And because of that, even if we were able to magically solve the problem here in San Francisco, it would only become a magnet for others to come here. So we must obviously work with our regional partners to address affordability. And that means coming together, and I know it's easier said than done, but I've got a great track record of working with people across the state, work with our regional partners to identify the need in numbers for low-income housing, for workforce housing, determine the cost, and then identify the funding source. And that may mean a massive general obligation bond that we would all do in a regional fashion, and it could be in the billions of dollars. But we must think big and reject cynicism and demand results, because otherwise we're just going to be nibbling on the edges, and we've got a big crisis in front of us that we need to finally fix.
Yeah.
I know you've already been talking tonight about the heartbreaking situation of so many on our streets who are dealing with mental and behavioral health issues, addiction issues, and we need to do so much better. There's a concept that is being floated right now. I'm working with District Attorney Gascon on this. Currently, in our county jails, upwards of 50% of our county jail inmates are receiving mental health services. 50%. Our county jail is our county's largest provider of mental health services. This is craziness in itself. 20% are receiving psychotropic drugs in our county jail. We should not be bringing those with mental health issues into our criminal justice system. So what we're proposing, and the details are still being worked out, I hope we can get this to the November ballot, to create a mental health justice center. And so rather than recycling people in and out of our county jail, doing no one any good, and of course those with mental health conditions are only deteriorating further when they're in county jail, we put them through this mental health justice center. And this is already moving forward in Miami, and the results are very successful. We're wasting a lot of precious public resources by doing what we're doing now. And so that's something I hope we will be able to get to the November ballot. I have signed how much time we're talking before we get?
1 minute.
Oh, really? Just 1 minute? Okay. I have signed a fair campaign promise to denounce, renounce, and reject all super PAC funding in this mayor's race. It is time we got the billionaires out of our power and political system. It's enough already. Not all of our candidates have yet signed it, and I urge you to urge them to sign this pledge. We can access public financing and still spend up to nearly $1.5 million. That's more than enough to run our campaigns. We don't need these super PACs in our race. And so I say this because I am of a full conviction that the voters of San Francisco, we should be able to choose our next mayor without the corrupting influence of ultra-wealthy super PAC donors. So with that, I ask you to support this campaign for change.
So Mark, I've asked every candidate this evening this question, and so I'm going to ask you. So before the untimely passing away of Ed Lee, he put forth a executive directive that I know you're familiar with to build 5,000 units of housing every year in perpetuity, and want to know, do you support it and what your thoughts are on that? Thanks.
So I want to build upon what you just suggested, Todd, which was, of course, a goal of Mayor Ed Lee's. I think that we need upwards of 50,000 new and refurbished units over a 10-year period, so the 5,000 figure works. But it shouldn't be just market rate housing. We need 5,000 per year of low-income affordable housing and workforce affordable housing. Now, as a member of the Board of Supervisors almost 20 years ago, I authored San Francisco's Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance, which is a fancy term for a mandate of a percentage of all market rate residential housing that is developed to be below market rate. It was a fascinating experience because I was new to the board. I didn't have that much depth in the planning code, but we brought all the stakeholders together, which is the way I do my work. We had for-profit developers, not-for-profit developers, advocates for seniors, for children, for bicyclists, for parks, and we met in my office every Wednesday with the city attorney for almost 2 years. And we worked out a lot of the complex details, and when we got to the Board of Supervisors, it passed unanimously and the mayor signed it into law. And since then, we have created thousands of units of below market rate housing with that inclusionary zoning ordinance. At the time, we defined those eligible for those units to be earning no more than 55% of area median income. That translates today to about $45,000 a year. But the board recently recognized that there are those earning 100%, 120% of area median income and still cannot afford market rate housing. Keep in mind, only about 10% of San Franciscans, this is astounding, only about 10% of San Francisco residents can afford to purchase market rate housing, and only about 15% can afford to rent market rate housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing for almost all of us, except for a very few fortunate folks. So we've got to work together to find greater opportunities to fund below market rate housing. And yes, we will develop market rate housing as well. In fact, as the definition of the inclusionary zoning is, if we don't build market rate housing, we don't get any of that percentage, whether it's 15, 20, or 40%. And I'll just conclude on that question with this. I think we need to revisit the inclusionary zoning ordinance once again. Right now, it's a percentage. It's been about 15%. It's on its way to 20%. But all projects aren't created equal. And so we shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all mandate. For example, Pier 70, which had to go to the ballot because of Prop B. When we raise height limits on the port, thanks to Prop B, the voters get to decide whether the project goes forward. That's a good thing because the developer then needs to make it attractive to the voters. It has to be supported by the people before it can go forward. And they're doing 40% below market rate at Pier 70. And the reason they can do that, the land came from the port, so it's a different kind of project that might go up in a tower south of Market. So there are different kinds of projects. We shouldn't have to fight for 40% every time there's a project on port land that they get the benefit from the port. We should put that into our mandate so we can do some projects with 40%, others projects will be less than that.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So I know that Sandra Holliday is here. She's the founder of Parents for Public Schools, and I know she had a question for Mark. Sandra?
Hi, thank you.
There you go.
Hi, Mark.
Hi,
so
Sandra.
I was able to send my kids to our local public schools, Alvarado, James Lick, and the Rufus Sauer School at Go Public. Yet 30% of school-age children attend private school. What will you do as mayor to support our public schools and make our city's public schools a viable option for everybody?
So the question is, I think Sandra had said that about 30% of San Francisco's students attend private school. And what are we going to do? What does the mayor, what will I as mayor do to make sure that more kids are attracted and able to get the public education that is their birthright, a quality public education in our school system here? So there's been a lot of debate at the school board with regard to neighborhood schools. Is there benefit in having kids travel across town to get to a school? All of the complexities of how families get their kids to a school of their choice, school choice. The challenge is for us to make sure that all schools are up to a certain level of proficiency and accountability and providing quality public education to all of our kids, whether they're on the east side of school or on the west side of school. State of California has struggled with an appropriate level of funding for public education. We rank somewhere between 40th and 48th among per pupil spending in California schools. It is a shame. And so since the funding comes from the state, and so much of the hardship in our public schools has to do with the level of funding, we don't pay our teachers enough. Teachers are digging into their own pockets to be able to provide for their own classrooms. They're doing the Lord's work. And I hope you will support a parcel tax for teachers' living wage, which will be on this November's ballot. We've got to be able to attract and retain the best teachers for our kids. In any case, California had the best public school system in the country prior to the passage of Prop 13 in 1978. Now, Prop 13, I was here when it passed, and there were all sorts of forewarnings. If this passes, we're going to see our public school system begin to fail. And it has been on a pretty downhill trajectory since then. But the purpose of Prop 13 was to make sure that grandma and grandpa wouldn't be priced out of their own homes because of ever-increasing local property taxes, which funded our schools at the time. So that was the purpose of it. But what happened was that commercial property owners got the benefit of it too. And that was not sold to the voters in 1978. And the state of California is losing many billions of dollars annually to make sure that we return Prop 13 to its original purpose. We don't want to see grandma and grandpa or anybody else priced out of their home, but that doesn't mean that Disney and Disneyland is paying property taxes going back to 1978. It's a sad joke, but we're all suffering and our kids are suffering. So that needs to be fixed at the state level.
Right. I'm sorry. I know there was someone in the back who I pointed to a while ago. And so, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Occasionally I ride Muni. It's filthy, it's unreliable, it doesn't run on time, and it's slow. Why do you think that is? And what do you propose doing about it?
The question is about Muni. Why is it not better than it is? I think I got the question right. So I ride the Muni Metro every day, and yeah, it could be a little cleaner, and if I have the wherewithal not to need to get on a train between 8:30 and 9:30, it's not such a bad experience. And I can tell you, since I've been back in the city these past 14 months, I've only had a day or two where a train just wasn't coming and I was late for something. That's not a bad average. So I'm talking about Muni Metro. I know the bus system is a whole nother situation. So Muni has been underfunded for quite a while. And what we've not focused on, as we've seen all of this job creation over the past 10 years, over 100,000 new workers coming into town, and then finding that our housing problem became a housing crisis because we weren't focused on our jobs housing balance, which is the foundation for balanced growth. We have 100,000 more San Franciscans living here today than we had just 20 years ago. And the projection is we may have another 100,000 20 years from now. So at 885,000 people in San Francisco, we've never in the history of the city had this many people. I share all this with you only because we have to, at the planning department and at the planning commission, approach our balanced growth and manage it in a much more thoughtful, comprehensive fashion, which we are, a holistic fashion, which we're not doing right now. So we, jobs, 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 without paying attention to the housing. Now it's housing, 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 but what about the infrastructural demands that all the new housing will create on transportation, on our muni system, on parks and open spaces and schools? We're not looking at it comprehensively. We must do a better job of doing that, and we must keep our transit system healthy.
Yeah. Sorry, that his time is up. So we're now, Mark, excuse me, hold on. Mark, thank you so much for, thank you so much.
You're a sexual harasser.
Okay.
You said all these awful things about the trans.
Okay.
And you sexually harass members of the trans and queer committee.
Okay.
You,
Where's Amy? Where's Amy Fairweiss? So Mark, I want to thank you so much for coming tonight. Yes, absolutely. Please feel free.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you for participating in the democratic process, and thank you for joining me in getting those super PACs out of this mayor's race. Vote June 5th.